How to analyze detailed sales from QuickBooks Online in a pivot table. First and foremost, before I can do any kind of real reporting, obviously I've got to make sure my books are bulletproof, meaning the information is reliable. I can prove every number. I can trace every posting in QuickBooks Online back to some kind of a source document or location that will confirm that the amount is real, that it's timed properly, all that stuff. So I want to preface this with that. But now what I'd like to do is show you how you can start with a detailed report in QuickBooks Online and then get it into Excel. And in Excel, using a pivot table, I'm going to show you, and I'm even going to go as far as to say is prove to you that what I'm about to show you is very simple, actually not hard to do at all once you see how it's done. And that it is going to be, I think it's going to prove to be the most efficient and effective way to get valuable, detailed information about sales data faster than any app out there. And I challenge anybody out there to prove me wrong. But I've seen a lot of the apps. I've seen the dashboard tools and the kind of tools that talk about making forecasts and all this. And I think the information I'm going to show you how to get today is better information than you can get from any app. And I think you can get it faster and more easily than any app will do. And certainly what I'm going to show you goes beyond what the capabilities of the reporting in QuickBooks or any other accounting software for that matter are, because there's just sort of detailed layers that you can get into in a pivot table, which is what I'm going to show you how to do, that you just can't do in a report that basically just gives you the ability to do rows and columns, right? Because we can subtotal within rows and subtotal within columns if we needed to in a pivot table. So let me show you what I'm talking about instead of just talking about it. Let's go to reports, and we'll run a standard profit and loss. I'm going to run it for all dates. This is the QuickBooks Test Drive Company. I don't think it actually matters. I think all the dates fall into the current year anyway. And we're going to click on total income because inside of this number is our total sales. And if you're watching this and you're following along at home, I want you to make a note that our total income on this report is $10,200.77. Let's click into there. And we get a report grouped by account because we clicked into total income, which has lots of accounts inside of it. So now we're going to customize this report a little bit. Ultimately, I want to get it into Excel. Before I do that, I want to get it as close as possible to a flat file. A flat file is just a linear file that simply has rows and columns and nothing subtotaled, right? So the first thing we're going to do is get rid of the account grouping by changing this to none and running that report. And then I want to customize the report. Let's close off the side menus to give myself a little bit more room to work with. You can go into here and add some columns that we want to add, right? So I definitely want to add customer because it's a sales report. I want to see the product or service and the quantity. And I think that's going to be actually about it. I don't need the balance for this purpose, and you'll see why as we get into it. I do want the rate for sure. And I think that's it. And that gets us part of the way there, but as you can see, the stuff I added just kind of sits out to the right, which isn't necessarily how I want it. So we're going to go up here and we're going to go to customize it a little further and go into our rows and columns. And in here I can change the order of the columns. So let's take the product or service and let's put that somewhere here, like after the name. Okay, the rate should come probably just before the amount. The quantity just before the rate. And I think that's pretty good. The other thing we want to include is the account, because remember I changed the grouping. So we want to make sure that's in here, which it is. It's here. All right, this way I can report on this data by both product or account or both. Okay, so this should get me into the right place. I've got, you know what I did? I added the customer here, which is actually redundant because the name is going to be the customer too. So let's take that out. Right, because there's the name. All right, perfect. Okay, that's pretty much all we need to do to ready this for export into Excel. So now we're going to do that. Okay, I'll just save this right in my downloads folder there. And I'll click on it to open it up. Okay, and then I've got a series of exercises that I'm going to walk through in here after I show you how to create the pivot table. And what I'm going to do is where this video is ultimately I'm going to have this posted in my new blog on my new website. And so you can access it there, and I'll put this list of exercises in there so that if you want to, you can kind of follow along, do everything I'm doing exactly the way I'm doing it in this video, and that, of course, is going to be the best way to learn it. Whatever I've exported, I preserve that by just making a copy of it before I touch it, before I do anything. And what that does is it frankly saves me the trouble in case I really mess up the data somehow of having to go back and re-export it. In this case, not a big deal. It only takes a second, but in some cases, it can mean literally hours of time that you save yourself by doing that. So we're going to clean this up a little bit now that we've got a copy, and I'm going to retitle this tab, and we're going to call it Source Data, because this is going to become the source data for the pivot table that we want to create. I'm going to click over here. I want to unmerge any cells that are merged. Also, just in case, I always just click wrap text while everything is selected and click it again to make sure there's absolutely no wrap text anywhere. All right, and now we're just going to get rid of the rows and columns we don't need. Okay, that takes care of it pretty much, and then sometimes there are totals that come through at the bottom. So I just want to get rid of those. Now, we're going to learn some Excel stuff here. So Control-Shift right arrow, right? I started off on cell A1, which has the first heading, which is the date. Control-Shift right arrow selects all the way across. Control-Shift down arrow selects all the way down. I'll grab my mouse for a second and use the mouse wheel to scroll down a few rows and make sure that I didn't miss anything, right? Make sure I've truly got the whole range selected now. Control-T like table and enter. Formats it as a table. You can play around with your color palettes up here if you want, if you're into that sort of thing. I joke around about it, but the truth is it's important. When you're going to be spending time in something like this, you want to choose a color palette that's appealing to your eyes. So don't minimize that. It's actually is important. So now that we've got the table organized, let's actually go straight and get straight down to business. Let's notice when I'm in the table, it shows me the table design options. If I come off the table, you'll see that goes away. Right? No more table options here. So you have to have your cell pointer somewhere on the table, and you'll see your table design options. And we're going to click right here where it says Summarize with Pivot Table. I'll click OK. And now we have our report canvas. And this is what I love about this, is I've never seen any other app or tool out there that gives you the kind of flexibility that you've got when you're creating a pivot table. And this is what I'm intent on proving to you right now. So let's start with something real simple. First, let's get the amount into the values quadrant. Okay, and then we're going to format this. Remember I told you to make a note of what that total was on the income statement? This is why. When you get to this point, especially after you've cleaned the data sum, you want to make sure you didn't remove anything that you didn't mean to. So we have a total amount of everything in the source data of $10,277. If I come back over to my QuickBooks Online company, like I said, moved it off to the other screen at some point. Back to report summary, $10,200.77. Just wanted to make sure of that. Now, let's bring that back. Apparently I can't control my mouse properly today. Okay, and I'm going to go through my exercises that I've outlined for today's lesson. So first let's grab the name, which remember is the customer. And let's bring that into the rows. So in a click, we can see sales by customer. Granted, you can see this in QuickBooks Online, so nothing too earth-shattering there. I'm going to rename this and call it Pivot Report. Okay. But what you can't do in QuickBooks Online or anywhere else is now analyze within each customer what products they bought, right? And I did that by simply dragging the product or service below it. Okay, so now in an instant I can see each customer and which products they bought for the time period that I've included in my source data, right? And you can filter dates and things. We'll get to that. So that's what that looks like. Now, what I can do is say, hey, you know what? I'd like to see this the other way around. I want to see each product and which customers bought that product. That's the beauty of a pivot table. A quick click and drag, and now I've got it flipped completely around. I've literally pivoted around on it, right? And so now I can see each product that we sell and which customers and how much they spent on each. Okay? Notice my total, still right. Okay, at the end of this video, we're going to talk about how to handle the blanks. Okay, so again, now you can start to see how very quickly this is just more powerful than any reporting app I've seen out there in terms of how quickly now we can start to pivot around on the data. Okay, so I'm going to flip it back so that we're back to customer and then item within that. Okay, now one thing I want to do is we have the dates in here, of course. But when you export data from a database like QuickBooks Online or any other database, it looks like a date, but it often comes in a format where it's not actually going to be read as a numeric date value, and we definitely want it to be able to do that here. So in the source data, I'm going to select the entire range of dates, okay? And we're going to use a tool in Excel to clean this called data, and then we go text to columns. And you don't really have to understand this conceptually, just follow it along mechanically for now. But we're going to choose fixed width, okay, because it looks like a complicated dialog, but it really isn't. We're just going to say fixed width, next, and I'm going to click right at the end of the dates. These dates formatting is all consistent, right? And notice what you're looking at is we have the double-digit month and double-digit day and the 4-digit year. We're going to say next, and we're just going to click on the right side, the outside of the date column, and we're going to choose this option, do not import. And what this does when I click finish is it causes Excel to sort of reanalyze what's in all of these cells as if I had gone through each one and edited the cell and hit enter so that it will now recognize these as dates. Notice how now it shrinks down, and we lost the double-digit kind of format on some of these dates because it was really looking at these dates as text before. Now it's truly looking at them as a number. And I can bring up my format cells dialog and make it consistent. This is how I normally like to look dates, is just double digit all the way through. Click OK. And then we can go back to the pivot table. Now, very important, anytime you make an update like that to the source data of the pivot table doesn't just instantly recognize that. You have to refresh it. So we go over here to the pivot table analyze tab, and we click refresh. And you're not going to really see anything happen, but rest assured, in the background, it did reanalyze and pull in, sort of import the dates as properly formatted dates. So now we can bring dates into the mix. So if I wanted to see what we've got here, which we're back to sales by customer and within that by product or item sold, I drag the dates down into the columns. Watch what happens. Because it's able to view these as true dates, it brings it in and automatically formats it by month, which is beautiful. And it puts the months in order. If it was reading these as text, first of all, you wouldn't have these descriptors as alpha month descriptions. And it would sort them alphabetically, if anything. It wouldn't sort them in proper chronological order, right? So a lot of little things going on there that make a huge difference, okay? So let's remove the customer so we're looking at item only so we can just kind of see sales by item. I can simply click over here where it says name and just drag it up here into the fields area. So that quickly chisels my list down to just, here's my monthly sales by item, right? Just real quick. Now let's get rid of the timeline, right? So another way you can remove something from the report is up top, just uncheck it. But keep in mind that with the date, it's also broken out the date into months, so you have to get rid of both actually and uncheck those. So now we're back to just a raw, here's the total sales by item for the whole time period, which, again, if you remember, we ran it for a year to date in the sample company. Next, let's add some other stuff in, because again, the idea is you can analyze this data lots of different ways and you can do it quickly. I don't have to run 5 different reports, and if I wanted to preserve any of these, all I'd have to do is make a copy of this tab and run another one, or go back to the source data and go back to the table design and just click summarize with pivot table again. Either way, that's how you could preserve these if you wanted to kind of save them so you can send them to somebody to have a look, right? So now what I want to do is we're going to add the quantity and the rate to this. This way we can start looking at each product and look at how many we sold and what we're selling it for, what rate. So I'm going to drag the quantity. Pay attention, as I drop the quantity, I let go of my mouse button, the green line indicates where it's going to go. In this case, I want it before the amount, right? So it gives me the quantity and the amount. Over here, we can format these like I had done on the amount to look more like real numbers, because right now they're fake numbers. And keep in mind, when we're selling items, a negative quantity means the inventory went out the door. That's why they're negative here. Now let's bring the rate in, and I'm going to put the rate right in between the two. Okay, let's format this. Notice it comes in as a sum. We want to change that to an average. The rate is something we want to look at as an average, not a sum. And then we're going to go to the number format here, and everything else we can kind of do just to make them look consistent, right? So now I can clearly see that this item, we sold 30 of them at an average of 75 each, which of course multiplies out to the 2250, right? And that will be true, of course, across the board here, right? So this is useful information, but here's where it starts to get a whole lot better. Let's bring our customers back in, which is the name. I'm going to put them underneath each product. So again, I'm going to click the name down and click and drag it down underneath the product. So now I can quickly analyze. Within each product, here are the customers that bought it. It shows me how many they bought and what the average rate is, what the unit price they're paying is, right? So the design services are pretty consistent. It looks like we're charging $75, I'm guessing, per hour, right? Down here, though, I have my concrete fountains, and Duke's Basketball Camp paid $15 each, but the Sun and Shine Family Store only paid $9.50 each. If I'm the accountant looking at this, I'm going to ask my client some questions about that. Why do they get such a deep discount on this when they're buying the same exact quantity, right? So what's the difference? And we know all this happened within the same year, within the same time period. So it's not like, well, they bought it 2 years ago when it was cheaper, right? So again, immediately this gives rise to the ability to do exactly this kind of analysis and really look at things and see what jumps out as not making sense, right? And so we can take a close look at that. And of course, as I always emphasize, as the accountant alone, I'm worthless looking at this data. I need to do it with the client because the client has the insights. My customer has the insights about their day-to-day operations. They might be able to explain something. Maybe these guys got a deal because of other things they bought, right? And then if that's what they tell us, we can do other pivots on this to confirm that. Right? So again, we have to start off looking at this with a bit of a critical eye and ask questions and have the customer there to answer those questions for us. That's critically important to how all of this needs to work. Another thing that you might notice as we're looking at this pivot table is it's got the subtotals up top. I find that kind of annoying. I'm not really sure why that's the default, but it is the default. So if we go over to our design tab, and over here to subtotals, I can say show subtotals at the bottom of the group, right? And that already starts to look a lot more like the way I'm used to looking at data, right? Another thing here with the pivot table, we also have different color palettes. So again, you might find that some of these other ones make it easier to read the data, maybe harder. There's lots of different formatting choices. You can go with banded rows, right? That puts little grid lines in the rows, which makes this kind of even easier to read. Right, so let's stick with this one. This one's nice and easy on the eyes, I think. Okay, so the main thing is we change the subtotal at the bottom and then change the color palette a little bit to make it a little easier to read or look at the data. So now what I want to do is I want to chisel it back down to just the amount, so we kind of start over again with a fresh canvas. So I'm going to get rid of the name. I'm going to get rid of the product or service. The quantity's out. The rate's out. Right, so I'm back to just the amount. Notice we're still got the right total. Right, that hasn't changed. And now what I want to do is I want to analyze sales by account. So far, everything we've looked at is really by product and customer, but that's why I made sure we included the account in here. So let's go to account. We'll drop that in the rows real quick. So these are the income accounts, right? The colons, as you probably well know if you're familiar with QuickBooks, denotes that there's an account with a sub-account, okay? So that's sales by account. Again, quickly, we can analyze that. Then we want to look at it by customer, right? So let's drop the customer in there. So now we can see each income account and how much income we earned by customer in those accounts. Again, really handy information. And just like we did earlier, I can flip this around and go name first and then account, so I can analyze each customer name and which services they purchased from me. This is not based on the product, but rather based on the income account, right? So again, it's just a little different kind of view into the sales information. Okay, and then we can put the timeline back in if we want, just to see what this looks like, by month. And notice the plus signs. I can expand these, and it'll break it down daily for me if I want to. Okay. Now let's do something else. I'm going to remove everything again. Start all over. Remember that when you remove the date, you also have to come down and remove the months. Okay, so we're back to our total, 10,277. Okay, so now let's bring the product back in. Okay, I want to analyze just the products and the quantities and the amounts, right? So let's get the products. Quantity again goes above the amount. No rate this time. Again, we have to format so that they look like proper numbers. And especially with something like this, we want it to be real clear what's a negative number versus a positive number. Okay, and now, once again, I'll add my timeline in. Okay, and so now within each month, this makes the report a little wider, maybe a little harder to read. We can resize the column some, and if I click off the pivot table, the tools to the right go away. That certainly brings the whole thing into view in this case, but you can imagine if we had a whole year, this would still get to be a very long report. But now we can quickly analyze by month, not just the quantity, not just the sales in dollars, but also the quantity, right? So we can quickly take a look at that and see. And it's pretty easy, especially with the quantities set up as negatives. It's pretty easy to say, all right, so we sold 10 of these for a total of 120. Right? Okay, again, let's reset this. And next I want to analyze the sales by product and then by customer in the columns. And this is the part I really want you to pay attention for. This is the part where it gets really interesting, because this is the part where I'm going to show you how you can provide an analysis to a customer that can literally and directly boost their sales. This is where we get to act as a strategic advisor and provide them with that guidance that we've been talking about. I'm giving you an exact and concrete example of how to do that. Normally, you're just used to hearing people tell you to do it, but they don't really tell you how. I'm giving you a very specific layout of how to do it. I mean, everything we've done so far, I think, would provide really interesting information to any client, whatever they're selling, products, services, or both. In this case, it's both. It's a landscaping company. But you can see if we have sales described by item, how nicely you can pivot around on the data and get really useful information really quickly. Okay, so we want to analyze the sales by product and then by customer. And the question we're trying to get answered is, what are the top selling products and who's not buying those, right? And we want to figure that out. Within that, we want to look at the top customers, the customers who buy the most from us, who aren't buying that top selling product or two. That's the question we're trying to answer for the client. So first, I'm going to bring the product or service in to the rows, okay? And then this time, we're going to look at the customer, but the customer, the name, we're going to put into the columns. Okay? So it gives us a really interesting view. Note, because of the color palette that we chose, the fonts they look like they're missing. They're not. We just have to format them with a white color. And might as well bold them while I'm here. And I see that some of the columns need to be widened, so let's just resize. Okay. So this is a good start. Now what I want to do is I want to come all the way out here to the right without going off the edge of the earth. And right in here in the grand total, let's just sort it by grand total. Okay, now this is total dollars. Let's go back to the left. And let's also come in here so I can continue seeing when I go back out to the right what I'm looking at. And we're going to freeze the panes. And now what I want to do is I also want to sort. I want the customers with the highest total sales to be towards the right. So I want to sort this by the amount total. So when I look at my column labels, I'm going to go to more sort options here. And I'm going to choose ascending. And then here I'm going to choose sum of amount. Right, so we're going to sort by the total in ascending order. That's going to get the ones with the highest sales all the way to the right, where we can clearly see which products have the greatest sales. So I click OK, and I'll go all the way out to the right here. And so now it starts to get really interesting, because I can see that my top selling item is the rock fountain, right? So this is probably like one of these big rock fountains you'd put in somebody's garden, like in their yard area or whatever. But I can also start seeing client by client. I can see Cool Cars hasn't got a rock fountain. Let's call them. Let's send them an email. Hey guys, based on all the other stuff that you've hired us to do for you, I really think there's a good chance you're going to love this product. Why don't you take a look? Send them some pictures, whatever you need to send them to, kind of try and get them sold on it, right? Moving back over to the left, Freeman Sporting Goods has got 2 of them, because as you analyze this, you can tell it looks like they're probably around $275 a piece. I'm going to show you how we can confirm that in a minute. Okay, John Melton, he just paid for some design. We might want to take a look now, if we haven't already, at what we came up with when we did that design for him, and we may want to make sure that we include a rock fountain for him, right? He might be ripe for that kind of a product. As I go to the left, notice I'm getting to customers who spent less and less with us in total. These guys obviously already got rock fountains. Come over to this one. Travis Waldron has spent, $562.55 with us. He might be very inclined to want to get a rock fountain, right? It's not like totally out of the range of what he's been spending. Dukes has one. And then we have this Weisskopf Consulting. They, at this range, we might be less and less likely to get the sale, because now we're talking about doubling what they've spent with us based on where we're at numbers-wise. But that's how I do this kind of analysis, and I would just come up with a list for my customer, or I'd have my customer looking at this with me and have them just take notes, like these are the customers that we want to try and sell the rock fountains to. And you can do that with any of the other stuff as well, obviously, but the rock fountain in this case just kind of proved to be a really good example of this, right? So again, just kind of making recommendations to the client. We're going to recommend that he send an email or something to Cool Cars, to John Melton, and to Travis Warden, and maybe even the Dukes basketball camp. Now, I mentioned confirming, because the other thing is this could be misleading because you don't know necessarily what quantities are inside this. So let's double-click this number. From a pivot table, you can actually drill in and see the details, and I'll widen this up. And what you can see very clearly here is that, sure enough, the rate for one is, in fact, $275, right? Notice it put this report on a separate sheet. If I'm done with it, I can delete it, right? That was just to take a quick look and see and confirm, okay? Now, there's something else in here that I want to take a look at, and we're almost done. I'm not going to hold you hostage for too much longer. Heck, this is a 30-minute video. I probably should have charged for it. But I want to take a look at something else that starts to get kind of clear for this. Is, where did it go? The gardening services, right? A lot of our customers are doing it, right? It looks like we're charging like $75 a pop for some stuff, right? But this jumps out at me as something that sounds like it lends itself to perhaps a monthly service that we should be offering instead of doing it sporadic like this. Now, maybe that these are doing it monthly, but with the pivot table, it's only going to take a second to find out, right? And how do we do it? First, let's get the name out of the columns. Let's get our timeline right back in there, okay? And now here we have, not a huge amount of line items, but still, and certainly if you did have a lot, what we'd want to do is come over here and filter this for gardening and just type GARD in the search, and it finds it, and I can confirm it. So now I'm just looking at gardening services, right? So we're definitely selling the service every month, but is every customer buying it every month? Let's find out. Drop the name down in there, and now we can get a really nice schematic for that one service. And one thing that becomes clear now is nobody's buying it consistently every month. Some people are doing it pretty regularly. And if you did a quick little analysis on this, and you can write the formula right out here. Let's just take an average, not including the grand total, right? And copy that down. You can see, again, it's all over the place. But now let's highlight this whole range. And down here, I can see my average of the averages is $92.69. So what I would suggest to my customer here is maybe offer a $100 a month gardening service and go to all of these people and say, hey, you know what? You're hiring us pretty regularly, every couple of months at least, to do the gardening. Why not just let's even it out. We'll do $100 a month, and we'll make sure every month somebody comes and gives you the best curb appeal in your area, right? So that's definitely another recommendation I would make, based on what we're able to see here and see it very quickly. All right, last thing I want to show you, I want to take a look at sales by customer and then product, which you've already looked at, but I want to show you a different way to look at that. So again, we're going to reset all our fields here, except for the amount. Let's get rid of that. Work our way up. All right, because we moved the shape of the table around, our split screen is no longer useful, so let's get rid of that. Okay, and our font, our total, needs to get reset there. Just easy, obviously. Okay, so we want sales by customer and then by product, so let's get name in there, and let's get product in there. Okay, this starts to look like a bit of a clunky kind of report, right? It's kind of hard to read, especially because a lot of them, we just have like one thing in there, right? But assuming we wanted to see this and see it in a way that's a lot more pleasing to the eye, what we'll do is we'll go to design, and we'll go over here to report layout, and we're going to say show in tabular form. And we also can go over here under the name and go to field settings and say no subtotals. That's going to make this a lot cleaner. Okay? And you could actually do it here too. Actually, no, this you wouldn't want to do it there. So you do it on the field. You say no subtotals on the name. Okay? So there's nothing to expand these to. So we want to look at by customer. Now let's drop the products in. We do have the products in, but don't forget we had the filter applied for gardening. So let's clear that out. Okay, because we were just looking at gardening services for a minute there. And notice that now we have a nice clear report. We're going to talk about the blanks in a minute like I promised. But we have a nice clear report. We can see Pies Cakes has used our pest control service and our gardening that's Jeff's Jalopies already. They've just used our pest control service, and it looks like they had a refund, right, or something. Again, when we look at the blanks, we're going to figure that out. So these guys are just one for one. Here's one that paid for two different services, right? They paid for some trimming and some for lighting design, and so on. So one thing you can do is, well, first of all, this gives us some good insights again, right? Looking at it by customer, looking at it in tabular form, it's easy to start analyzing, the customers and what services they bought. The other thing we can do, by the way, is notice when it does have a customer that's bought two or more services, we have these blank lines in between. Some of you may like it that way. Some of you may prefer to see it repeated on every line. So in the report layout, we can actually show repeat all item labels. And if we do that, it just fills it in automatically. So some people might find that a lot easier to sort of read and look at, so it becomes real clear. And others of you might hate that. That's why we have these choices, right? So we'll just go back to showing in tabular form, and we do not need to repeat item labels. Okay? So last thing, let's take a look at those blanks, right? First of all, let's sort this again by amount. I guess, it's not letting me because it'll sort by amount within each grouping, right? So let's take out the product or service. So now we're just sorted by amount. Actually, let's do product and not name, and you'll see why. Because then it puts all the blanks together. Because that's what it's telling us is we have line items in the source data that don't have a product in them, right? So now I can go back to the source data, and let's go to the product or service. Notice the table has its own filters. The blanks are always going to be at the bottom. You can do the search, right? And that way only blanks is checked. Okay. And we can start to see very clearly what's going on. We have some discounts, right? We have some expenses, so they're not invoices that have a product or service that's being used. So what I'm going to do is, just so we have it described so that there are no blanks and we can see very clearly what's what, I'm going to take these discounts and just copy them over to the product or service column so that we'll, even though that's not a true product or service that came from QBO, we can quickly analyze it that way. And these expense line items, you can see very quickly, they're coming out of the checking account. These are just refunds, right? So let's just put that here in the product or service, refunds. Okay, we can clear the filters on this now because we've taken care of those blanks. Back to the pivot report. Remember, what we'll need to do is refresh this. Okay, and now it becomes much clearer. We have discounts of $89.50 and refunds of $79.28, and we can certainly, in a flash, look at which customers those were for, right? Paulson Medical Supplies, Barnett Design, and Pies Cakes all got discounts, and then these guys got refunds, right? And that's about it. So, and this is probably like a credit memo, right? Because it wasn't there in one of those, which brings up the very last thing I'm going to show you. And then I really swear I'm done. So we're going to take out, let's take out everything. Let's start from a clean slate. Okay, so I want to do sales by customer. So let's bring the name in. Okay, and then let's drop the transaction type into the columns. This gets kind of interesting. So this lets you see, and let's go down and look at the totals. First, let's freeze our panes again. This lets you see, and it explains a lot. So we have Amy's Bird Sanctuary had a credit memo over $100. That's why it didn't show up as one of those blanks, because with the credit memo, you're actually using a product or service, right? But then we have the expenses, which we called refunds in terms of the product. Right, and then we had the invoice. Again, let's get this formatted so we can see all the column totals. Okay, the invoices is obviously the bulk of it because that's mostly all the sales. We have the refunds, right? Pies, cakes. So that was probably an actual refund receipt. Oh no, we put that in the product, sorry. But not in the transaction type. So no, so this is probably a refund receipt that we created as opposed to a credit memo. The difference, of course, is the refund receipt. We've actually given them a refund. The credit memo, we're just giving them a credit towards a future service. And then for whatever reason, we had some sales that we did as a sales receipt instead of an invoice. You know, no matter really there. But again, it's just another way that could be interesting to analyze and also could help identify issues, you know, that we could be having if we're having them. So that, my friends, is, wow. I thought this was going to be like a short little video just showing you some things, but what can I say? I had outlined a lot of exercises to go through to kind of show you what you can do here with this stuff. So hopefully you appreciate it. Hopefully you find it really helpful and even powerful. And as always, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, or feedback, I'm pretty sure you know where to find me. So just find me on the web, post your comments and questions below wherever you're watching this. Find me on YouTube. Just search for Nerd Enterprises. Find me on Facebook. Just search for Nerd Enterprises. Pretty much Nerd Enterprises anywhere. Instagram, Nerd Enterprises. You'll find me under the name Nerd Enterprises pretty much anywhere you look on the web. Which brings up my final point. As always, I hope you learned something here. I hope you had some fun along the way. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day. And I look forward to seeing you on the web.